What's up, YouTube? So today we're looking at that Goa-Trance ARP that I was talking about in the previous dive into Goa-Trance episode. So let's have a look. So this is the sound that I was talking about. So this sound is super basic, but I think the kind of like the sort of core focus in the sound is that kind of like pattern in the arpeggiator, and it's got a very kind of like old school dance ravey kind of vibe going on. And again, I think it's due to, you know, constraining yourself in terms of the amount of control that you have over the MIDI notes and stuff like that. So for this type of thing, I like to use a built-in MIDI plugin inside Cubase called Step Designer. There are other ways. I mean, there's a plugin called Riffer, which is also really, really good. I also highly suggest that. I did a video on it if you want to check that out. We'll try remember to post a link in the description as well. So anyway, so what I'll do here is let's add a new instance of TAL-Bassline. And I'm actually going to mute this, this original one that we've got. So here on this guy, what we want to do is we can actually just solo it quickly. And on MIDI inserts over here, I want to drop down this little menu. And we want to add Step Designer over here. So like I said, the cool thing about Step Designer is it kind of constrains you to a sort of particularly simple approach to creating these kind of like arps and melodies. But I think that's kind of like the power in it. And it's a little bit easier to create a bit more of a sort of compelling melody when you have, you know, only so much options to choose from. Whereas I find when you're using like the piano roll, there's so much choice of what you can do. You know, you can make notes so much longer and so much shorter and stuff like that. But I find having all that much control kind of limits the brain in terms of how you think about breaking open that sort of those boundaries. But anyway, so here, once we've added Step Designer, what we can do is we can actually just draw in a bunch of notes here. So I think this track is in C. So what we can do is we can just draw in a bunch of C3 like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to let it loop while we just configure these settings a little bit. I don't think I actually did too much in terms of the sound design on the actual synth itself, but there's a couple of key elements that I want to kind of talk you guys through how to get this kind of like RP kind of plucky lead sound. So what we're going to do is we want to actually turn this frequency of the filter down so that every time that the note triggers, it's going to trigger this envelope. And then let's set this up a little bit. Let's hear what's happening now. So it's not all that interesting. So what I like to do to kind of inject a little bit of kind of randomness into the sound is I will put on sample and hold, and I'll set it to 1/8 clock. And then I will just add a little bit of modulation over here. So what that's going to do is it's going to kind of change the filter ever so slightly in that kind of sequence. So we get something more like this. So tweaking this sound here, like these fine parameters, I mean, that's up to taste. If you want something that's a lot more sort of percussive and plucky, then you want to turn this decay down a little bit. If you want something that's more of a kind of lead type of sound, then you want to turn this decay up a little bit. So now once we've got a sound going, let's head back to Step Designer, and we can start adding in a sort of melody kind of thing going on here. So because I know I'm working in a C minor scale here, what I usually do is I'll end up just kind of adding in random notes in that scale. So let's go with like a G sharp. I like to kind of, you know, visualize in my mind what sort of pattern the melody is going on, you know. So I mean, when you listen to that ARP, you can kind of hear it's got that 1 2 up, 1 2 a bit higher, 1 2 a bit higher kind of thing going on, and that kind of like builds and builds and builds the tension. So here I wanted to kind of start a bit lower in the octave rather than going just straight an octave higher. So a lot of the time with like an arpeggiator, it'll go C, C, and then the next octave C. But we want to create that kind of like building kind of motion. I guess it's up to taste. You can do it how you want, but that's kind of the idea that I had in my head when creating this lead. So I started on the G, then went to G sharp, and then I think A sharp is the next one in the scale. And then here, it was another 2 rests, and then here I went to C. That was like the final like high note, and then down 2 at the end here on like a gallop kind of roll, like G sharp and then F. Right, yeah. I think that's what I did. So let's listen to this now. So that's the basics of the actual sort of synth sound. So then on top of that, I used a couple of effects that I've also noticed are quite well used in the Goa-Trance genre, and that's a flanger. And I actually really like the built-in flanger that's in Serum. So what I did is I added Serum effects. So as far as I know, anybody who owns Serum, they can go download a copy of Serum Effects, which is essentially just like the effects engine of Serum. So you can actually just go here, apply a flanger, and then you've got the exact kind of flanger that's built into Serum to put onto, you know, any audio source, which is pretty cool. The reason I like Serum's built-in flanger is it's got this particularly kind of like metallic sound when the feedback goes quite high. And it kind of sweeps around this kind of metallic sound. So you'll hear what I'm talking about now. Let me just play the ARP while we tweak this. See, I don't like to overdo it. I like to get it so that it just bites a little bit on the edge of that kind of like LFO that it's got, just to kind of create like a little bit of kind of saturation and movement in that sort of synth sound, because the sound itself is pretty boring. I mean, it sounds good. It's pretty sort of warm and it's got that kind of vibe, but to give it more modulation and more movement, this is a really cool effect. So then on top of this, I'm just going to put a little bit of delay. And again, like I said, something that I've noticed quite often with Goa-Trance is that they use quite a high mix and quite a low feedback with their ping pong delays. So that's how I've set it up here. And let's listen to this. So because I left the sub oscillator up in the SH-101, I kind of liked the low end that it was creating. There's a lot of low end coming through here, and you can hear it's actually clashing with the bass. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put quite a high pass filter on here, and then also just put this wider plugin on just to give it a bit more wideness, of course. And I'm going to tweak this to taste when listening to it. But let's have a listen to what this is sounding like. So once I've got it sounding cool and I've like punched in the sequence and everything like that, so this is another reason why I like to use step sequencer for this kind of thing, because I find that, you know, punching in a MIDI and then having to duplicate it over the whole project, it sometimes slows down these kind of like creative processes, especially for these kind of quick leads and arps, you know. So I find often guys will end up defaulting to a preset or something that they know has that type of thing built in, as opposed to finding a quicker and easier workflow, if that makes sense. So here, what I want to do is you can actually set this record output to track, and then just record some of that loop into the MIDI. And here's a little plot twist. So that's how I actually made the bass line. Is I was creating that ARP for the 101 kind of pattern, and I was like, you know what? That kind of melody would work really well to kind of complement that, you know, to build onto that sort of gaining momentum type of thing that we're trying to create within the sort of Goa-Trance style. And so I just copied the MIDI down. As you can see, it's the same thing. So I know in a previous episode I mentioned I'm going to tell you guys how I created that MIDI, but it's something that kind of just came with the sort of creative process. As I was making that ARP, I was like, you know what? That would work well as a bass line. And so, yeah, it just kind of fell into place. And so here, then what I like to do is once I've created that one variation, let's just move this kind of out of the loop over here, and we can open up Step Designer again and kind of start adding in maybe other notes in a higher octave and kind of start experimenting there and see where that leads us. And now that we've kind of recorded this MIDI out, we've already solidified that kind of cool loop. So we've always got something we can fall back to. Furthermore, you can kind of save a preset in Step Designer if you want to. But I don't often do that. I find these kind of quick melodies just sort of come naturally when I know the scale, and I can always just transpose the MIDI afterwards, if that makes sense. So let's open up Step Designer and we can start tweaking here. So let's open up Step Designer and we can start tweaking here. So, I mean, this might not end up as that exact ARP pattern that I had created in the previous, that you heard in the background there. So I may end up changing it, but this is the kind of workflow that I usually end up kind of going with. So I don't remember the exact notes. I mean, I could probably just look at the MIDI, but I mean, it's going to slow down the process. And, you know, I might make something unique that sounds better, or it might not sound as good as the ARP that I had before. So I might not end up using it, but this is the kind of workflow that led me to that. So yeah, anyway. If you use the mouse wheel, you can actually scroll up and down, and that kind of frees up space to, you know, experiment a little bit more with other notes and stuff. And the cool thing about this is now you don't know what notes are where. So like in your mind, you're a little bit kind of freer to do what you want to do. I find often when I go into the MIDI, I will try change notes that may have not been changed before. And often you kind of forcing yourself into a particular type of sound or a particular type of sequence, which may be a good thing for certain sounds, but again, this is something that's like a completely different workflow. So it might result in a new sequence or something to you that's going to add that kind of spice to your track. Anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead here and punch in some random notes. Are we going to let it play while I'm punching in these notes? Okay, it sounds horrible compared to that sequence, but anyway, you get that. You get the idea. I might actually just edit that part out. Anyway, like I said, we've recorded the MIDI out anyway. So, I mean, if we end up, you know, making a complete mess like I did now, we've always got this MIDI that we can fall back on. And we can now go in and edit this if we want to, or anything like that, or sequence it. I actually made this while just messing around here. You can actually, if you do want to copy it, you can actually pause the screen and copy this. Anyway, awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.